and introduce Susan Mizrahi. So Susan is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Australia Post and a Senior Sustainability Strategist with over 20 years of experience working across Asia, Europe, and North America. Susan joined Australia Post in 2015 as the Head of Corporate Responsibility and then moved up to being their first Chief Sustainability Officer in 2019. She also acts as chair of the London Benchmarking Group, or LBG, which I believe has just changed its name. So we'll touch on that in a second. Susan has particular expertise in business human rights obligations, sustainable supply chains, forced and child labor, and the China-Tibet issue. She also focuses on advancing the UN Global Compact principles. We heard from Corinne earlier today from the Global Compact and also the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
So two quick questions before we get into the big ones. Mm-hmm. First, am I correct that London Benchmarking Group has changed its name?
Yeah, you're very correct. So it's just changed its name to Business for Societal Impact. So for those of you that are not already familiar with the London Benchmarking Group, or LBG, it is the global standard for measuring corporate community investment. So it provides a uniform framework for companies to measure all the same things, and so that people can look externally and see which company is donating more to communities or investing more in communities and societal change than others. So yes, it's just changed its framework, expanded it, and actually I'm exiting in my role as chair through this transition, but it's really happy to see it grow and morph.
Yeah, and it sounds like a much more descriptive name.
Yes, that's right. My sister was always saying to me, I didn't think you were interested in gay and lesbian issues, you know, the LBG. And I think a lot of people thought it was part of the diversity agenda that I am actually interested in. But yeah, people were getting it confused in recent years. So it was time they changed the name.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm also curious, given that you're Australia Post's first Chief Sustainability Officer, do you have any idea how many Chief Sustainability Officers or CSOs there are in Australia?
Yeah, so I didn't when I was first promoted to that position a year and a half ago. And then I met with a sustainability recruiter who said to me, you're only the second Chief Sustainability Officer in Australia. And I said, actually, no, I didn't know that. At that point in time, there was a Chief Sustainability Officer at Telstra. I know he left, and I don't know if they've replaced that role, but maybe they have. I suspect they will fill it if they haven't at the moment. They've been committed to sustainability as a business for a long time. And then I have been pleasantly surprised to see some of our customers since my title was changed. Some of our Australia Post customers have also started to have Chief Sustainability Officers in their business as well, which is really exciting because it is following a trend that is quite prominent in the US and also in Europe, that somebody with a sustainability role has a seat in the management committee and ideally in the executive team eventually. So incrementally we'll get there as a country. Sometimes we take the lead in innovations, and sometimes we're a few steps behind, but I'm happy to see a slight trend in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. It's very important to have that seat at the executive table and with the decision makers. So fantastic to see Australia Post recognizing how important that is. Now I see a bit of freezing. I don't know if that's on my end. Is it me freezing or is it you, Susan, do you think?
I don't generally freeze, but last time I presented to a large group of people, a couple of hundred, it froze. So I think it's every time I do a public event, it freezes. But I don't usually, you did freeze for me a little bit then, so hopefully it's okay. But I can turn my camera off if that's easier.
We'll see if we can get through. Yeah, we've had that kind of only today. This is the first time that anything's ever gone wrong with my camera. And
always the way.
So speaking of Australia Post, obviously taking this step in raising the importance of sustainability, what drives a large business like Australia Post and others across Australia to make sustainability such an important business strategy?
Look, I think there's multiple reasons for it. I think um, that one is changing stakeholder expectations. So customers are increasingly asking us more questions about our emissions profile and what we're doing, how their parcels are being delivered, what we're doing behind the scenes. Australia, so customers, other stakeholders as well, like just members of the community, everyone sort of feels that they own Australia Post, and I guess in a sense they do in Australia. We don't receive government funding, but we do return dividends back to the government, and so there is that sort of heart connection that a lot of Australians have with Australia Post, particularly if they grow up in remote and regional parts of Australia. So definitely changing stakeholder expectations and customer expectations. I'd also say, though, that the sustainability imperative has changed. So environmentally and socially, we have really massive challenges as a society that we're facing. And large businesses, rightly or wrongly, and whether they wish to acknowledge it or not, have contributed to those issues. They've also created great solutions, but they've also contributed. And I think there's an increasing recognition in recent years that business has a role to play to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the broader sustainability agenda. So I think the imperative, we're just working in different circumstances and have to address different issues as players in society. I think perhaps back to the stakeholder piece, though, another set of stakeholders are our employees, particularly younger employees, but not only just young employees. And I want to make that point of difference. So Australia Post is a little bit unique in that we are required by legislation to turn a profit, but we're also required to provide a community service, which is to deliver the mail at a uniform rate in every location around the country. And that role that we've traditionally played in community is a big reason why a lot of people come to work for Australia Post as opposed to other corporates. People like that connection with society and with the community. And so we often hear that, millennials and younger people are really interested in working for sustainable businesses. But, part of the definition of sustainability is what we're doing in terms of society. And actually a lot of our older employees that have been with Australia Post 30, 40 years, sometimes second, third generation, I think we even have some fourth generation people at Australia Post, also wanted to work for and do work for our business because of that. So I think it's a real misconception to say that it's just younger people, but employees are another driver for companies to elevate sustainability internally and externally. And so, yeah, they're probably the key reasons that I point to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you touched on that about some of the non-millennials can be just as interested in sustainability issues as well. We were just talking a bit about that with the previous presenters around family businesses and how those interact as well. So yeah, you followed on from that perfectly. So I specifically wanted to have Australia Post and yourself to talk, not only because of being an award-winning business around sustainability, but also as a purchaser of a lot of small businesses potentially. So how is sustainability being therefore embedded into Australia Post and perhaps other large businesses' approach to managing its supply chain and contracting suppliers?
Okay. The first thing I'd sort of say is that Australia Post, while we are a big business, we actually are a big business made up of small businesses. So a lot of our post offices are licensees, and so they're actually effectively small business people in and of themselves. But if you look at the supplier end of it, you're quite right. We procure from a very large range of different organisations, some big, some small. So on the big end of town, we've got, your Qantases and your Linfox and, your fuel companies that we procure from. But then we purchase many things, whether it be uniforms or items that we sell in our outlets. all of the things that we need in head office to run the business. So there's a lot of different, and all the things that we require at the operations side of things in all the facilities around the country. So we have a very diverse supply chain and a very large supply chain. And I guess, you know, I touched on our unique dual purpose of having to turn a profit, but providing a societal impact, and that means that sustainability is just very natural to Australia Post, and carried out through things like our supplier code of conduct, our ethics, so the standards by which we're expected to operate as individuals within the business. We have a supplier code of conduct, but also we have a set of sustainable procurement principles. And so they're 6 principles. I've just got them up on the screen because I'll never remember them all. But you'll be able to find them on our website. And they're things like never compromising when it comes to health and safety, having zero tolerance for harassment, abuse and discrimination, but also things like prioritising social and Indigenous procurement and ethically certified goods and services. One of the principles is around modern slavery, so specifically about not using exploitative or forced labour or exploitative wage practices as well. And then a couple of principles around environmental impacts and collective bargaining. And so we expect all of our employees to respect our sustainable procurement principles and honour our supplier code of conduct. And then also, you know, there's just the general terms of the terms of trade as well, and the contracts with those suppliers too.
Yeah. I'm interested about your licensees, the small businesses that are also under the banner of Australia Post. Are you supporting them in this sustainability space as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we often talk about our extended workforce and view licensees and people that work in the post offices and our contractor workforce as just an extension of our existing workforce. But clearly there are some differences. So there's certain principles that we just extend across the board, and you know, certain expectations that we do, but there's other things that we need to provide just by the pure legal sort of perspective that we have with employees as opposed to contractors. So for example, we have for a long time made it available to Australia Post employees to access the Employee Assistance Program, so the EAP. If people are facing sort of emotional or financial hardship, that they have a counselling service that they can turn to. A few years ago, we extended that offering to not just employees, but their family members as well. And in recent years, we've extended that to our contractor workforce and our licensees in particular. And so there's certain things that we do because we do view those stakeholders as an extension of our workforce. So that's sort of a social dimension of sustainability, I suppose. From an environmental perspective, it's a really good suggestion, and it's something that's quite topical. So one of the things that my team and I are working with licensee post offices on at the moment is trialling in some locations in New South Wales soft plastics recycling offered through RedCycle. So generally people can go to supermarkets and Coles and Woolies around the country to recycle their soft plastics. And that's something that we're trialling with some licensees at the moment. We've also had some bottles collection services that we've run through licensees in the past as well. So I think these small businesses are sometimes, you know, like some of them are very enthusiastic and want to be doing more in terms of the environment, and sometimes they recognise it as an opportunity to generate additional funds and to drive further foot traffic into the stores. As I will be the first one to say that I think there's a lot more that we can do in all of our post offices to demonstrate our organisational commitment to sustainability, but it's a big business and sometimes change is not as quick to bring about as we'd like.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is actually one of the things that I think there's so much potential in small businesses because they are agile, they can change overnight. A corporate, you are trying to steer a cruise ship slowly around. So
Yeah, that's exactly right. I often use that analogy as well.
So it would be good for those watching now and after the fact to understand a little bit more how they can look in, how can they be supplying to a large business? What are the kinds of, how does that, what you were talking about before in terms of those different principles and different expectations of a business, how does that work in practice? I.e., what are the things that Australia Post is actually looking at a supplier's performance around, and what evidence would they be providing?
Yeah, sure. So a few things to say about that. I guess the fundamentals need to be there in terms of price and reliability of product and service, and sometimes also I think sometimes small businesses have not necessarily won the contract with Australia Post because they haven't been able to deliver the volume that we may necessarily have required. And I know that that can be a bit of a sticking point for some small businesses at times for some of our products, but hopefully not all. As I said, we do want to engage with small businesses. We do want to engage with Indigenous and social enterprises as well. So I think it's those general terms, they need to be the price and the reliability. But from a sustainability perspective, I guess it's a matter of meeting those additional requirements that I outlined before. So, you know, the supplier code of conduct and the various elements within that, our sustainable procurement principles, and recognising the type of business that we are providing a community service and trying to, I guess, demonstrate that they want to build a relationship with the organisation, and that we honour and respect one another's values, I would say. I do know, and I mean, I don't mean to sound utopian about it. I do understand that small businesses that procure, or, you know, that sell to a lot of larger businesses can just get overwhelmed in the number of different requirements that those companies have, and different surveys that they need to meet, and different hoops they feel like they need to jump through. I'd make a couple of points, which is very, you know, all large companies today are concerned about their emissions and their impact on the environment, whether they have formal chief sustainability officers and corporate responsibility strategies or not. They're all concerned about it. So, you know, having a product that, you know, impacts the environment positively as opposed to negatively is one thing that can be uniform across the way. The other thing, though, that we're seeing changes in the Australian landscape about is with respect to modern slavery. And so demonstrating that you can provide your goods or your service in a way that does not have a negative impact on individuals, whether here or abroad, and whether physically or emotionally. And so I'm not sure if you've discussed it yet today, but there is a new piece of legislation that the Australian government has introduced in the past couple of years called the Modern Slavery Act, and companies with a turnover of more than $100 million are required to publicly report annually what the risks of modern slavery are in their operations and in their extended supply chain. So effectively, that's all of our suppliers, that's our the small businesses that we're talking about here today. So the more you can help us reduce our risks from environmental, from a modern slavery perspective, the better, and the more effectively you communicate that, you know, the better as well, whether it's in your proposal or in your conversations with whichever company you're pitching to.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good point. And so would you say that carbon and modern slavery are two of the most important kind of areas of focus for a lot of businesses to align with, or are there some?
I would say environmental impacts as a whole, not just carbon, but yes, carbon and climate change is a big one. I think waste is a really big one, certainly really big for Australia Post, and plastics by extension of that. We've just gone, you know, we as a business or I guess you will have all shopped online over the past 12 months, even if you hadn't shopped online before. And packaging is a really sensitive issue for us. I'm really proud of the fact that we have best on market, product, and that our packaging is made out of 80% recycled plastic content for the satchels, and that our cardboard boxes are also made with recycled content, and they're FSC certified, Forest Stewardship Council certified. But that's a really big issue for us, is waste and packaging. That's potentially unique to Australia Post, or particularly relevant to Australia Post given our business model. But waste as a whole is something that companies are concerned about. Water usage as well, for some companies, that's less relevant to Australia Post. But depending on what product you're making and service that you're providing, water is a big issue for companies too today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting in the packaging space, that is a area of difficulty for every company from top to bottom, the big ones and the tiny ones. I hear that so often from small businesses really struggling to find the right packaging suppliers, especially sustainable ones. So congratulations on being able to find one that could cover the very large demand of Australia Post.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we do procure from more than one packaging company, but yeah, I mean, a lot of small businesses are reliant on Australia Post to send out their products to their customers too. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions in when it comes to packaging today, and plastics as well. They are legitimate issues, but I think sometimes people just sort of think, plastic is automatically bad, and I don't subscribe to that. And in fact, we went through a process of having a full life cycle assessment of our packaging undertaken, and we found that when you look at the whole, from the raw ingredients through to use of the product, and then how it's disposed of at end of life, packaging that is made with 80% plastic recycled content is actually better than cardboard boxes, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people, because we sort of are taught to believe that all plastic is bad, and that's not necessarily the case today. So I think it's hard to be an effective small business out there in terms of sustainability today, because there's so many issues that you need to consider. But it's also worthwhile doing your research and your homework to see what's true for your company, because sometimes you might get a steer in the wrong direction.
Definitely, and that's something that I'm hoping, especially this Facebook group that I'm trying to encourage people to join, will be in the end somewhere where people can share what they're finding, and hey, I found a fantastic supplier of this exact thing, that we have all been sharing our struggles around. So hope that will be a good resource for that in the future. But thank you so much for touching on that point about recycled content, especially how if it's a recycled content plastic, then that's fantastic, because that's actually using stuff that would otherwise be going to waste. So even though it is still plastic, you are creating a solution by purchasing it. So that's very important. So let's move on to chatting about this fabulous new white paper that Australia Post has just released. So I'm very, very excited to see other people focusing on this important topic around helping small businesses to be more sustainable. So can you tell us, it was both a survey and a bit of a guidance, so can you tell us what it found?
Yeah, sure. So I might give you a bit of the backstory, which is that 4 years ago, we were looking at the question you raised before about how we can support our licensee operators and our small business customers become more sustainable, noting that we are, as I said, a big business made up of small businesses. And so we undertook some research then and put together a white paper on small business sustainability, and found at that time that yes, sustainability was important, but it was potentially a bit of a nice to have. And then about a year ago, we started to have this conversation that has the dial shifted a little bit with small businesses in relation to sustainability. And 12 months ago when we started talking about it, we'd just gone through these mega bushfires in Australia, and we're starting to hear about this virus overseas that was impacting supply chains. And I thought, oh, it'd be really interesting to know if small businesses' perceptions of sustainability has changed in the way that we're seeing with corporates as well, and just general consumers and members of the public. And so we undertook a survey and undertook a series of in-depth discussions with small business customers and small business Banksia Award winners, and chatted with them about what they thought about sustainability today and how important it was to them. And indeed, we found that there's been a really significant shift in just a 4-year period. So small businesses 4 years ago were surveyed, it was about 32% of small businesses at that time that were saying sustainability was very important to the operations of their business. And now it's 44% of small businesses. So it's effectively 50%, right? 6% difference. Like you're talking about a large portion of small businesses that are saying it's very important. And I think there's increasing recognition that it's not an either or scenario. To be able to thrive, for your business to be able to thrive and to be able to grow into the future, we need healthy economies, we need healthy workforces, we need a healthy environment. And I think small businesses perhaps get that even more quickly than some corporates, because they're often very embedded in their local communities. And so that was certainly a message that we heard loud and clear with the white paper. The other thing is that I wanted to be able to create a bit of a how-to for small businesses and what they could do to consider sustainability if they hadn't beforehand. And so the document, the white paper, contains a roadmap for sustainability, for how companies can or small businesses can grow more sustainably as well. So if you've not had a chance to download the document, I really encourage you to. We've tried to make it user-friendly for people that are time poor running their own businesses. But again, it's just one way in which that we're trying to support our customers to do the right thing in terms of society and the environment.
Absolutely. And I've just pasted that link into the chat if anyone wants to open up the document. I think it's also important to remember that this survey was done basically during lockdowns. So the fact that it's 44% of small businesses in the middle of a pandemic, when they were concerned about their own livelihoods, they still considered sustainability to be 50% more important than they did 4 years ago. So
yeah, I think that's a really key point. I think the most interesting thing in this report from a sustainability practitioner's perspective is the shift in such a short amount of time, despite the fact that we were going through an economic downturn, and people are still saying, no, they recognise that we're having pandemics and we're having these sorts of issues like bushfires because society has mismanaged the environment for such a long time. And so I thought that was very interesting to see, and I was quite heartened to see that actually as well.
Absolutely. I'm also interested if out of that report you would say there was any, because obviously you've got the roadmap, and sometimes I guess those roadmaps can be the same for any type of business. Would you say that there was any particular strategies that came out of it that are really particular to smaller businesses?
Well, some of the things that we were hearing from the small businesses was indeed that they're concerned about packaging. So that was something we heard a lot. It might have been the small businesses that we spoke to a little bit, because some of them were Australia Post customers, but we did try to speak with small businesses that were service oriented and not just product oriented, but packaging was one of those issues that they raised with us. The other one was community investment as well. And so we found that a lot of small businesses are invested in supporting the local communities in which they are operating in. And I think that's something that's happened for a long time, in that, small businesses have supported the local fete and things like that at a local level. But I think that what we're starting to see more of is small businesses aligning to a particular social issue and building their products and their proposition around how they can give back to society in that way. And so, you know, Thank You Water is probably not classified as a small business anymore, but it was not so long ago, and that's an example of a company that did want to provide a community service as well, and has established itself as a social enterprise.
Yeah, great. So that is a very important strategy that you touch on, of find that one thing that you want to kind of be known for, that you can really focus your efforts into. Oh, and by the way, Thank You was on earlier today,
Oh, yeah, great.
and they actually have 30 employees still, which I was absolutely shocked by, that even as much as they've grown, they are still only just across the line, the boundary into a medium-sized business anyway.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Good for them. That's a great story. Yeah.
So I'm also wondering if, well, and perhaps this will lead into the next question. So first, just a reminder for anyone who is watching to go ahead and pop any questions that you have for Susan into the chat box. But what number one piece of advice beyond that, you know, focus on one thing, do you have for small businesses looking to be more sustainable in 2021? And it might be something that came out of that guidance.
My number one piece of advice is for people to download the white paper and have a look at the roadmap, because we tried to create it deliberately to be able to answer that question. We tried to provide as much information there in a digestible way for, as I said, for people that are time poor. What I would also say, though, is for small businesses that are trying to work with larger companies, is to recognise that I think it's absolutely the case that we've gone beyond sustainability being a tick the box exercise. And, you know, companies really are being encouraged, as I said, from a legislative perspective, but also from a stakeholder perspective, to scrutinise their operations and their supply chains, whether it be around modern slavery or reducing their carbon emissions, etc. And so we can't do that well if our supply chain is not healthy and clean. And so I think that there's increasing recognition of that within companies. And so I encourage small businesses to not just skip over those questions or just tick the box and not give consideration to it, but really to grow in a way, to build your company and grow it in a way that is respectful of those social and environmental issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the box or unmute yourselves. But also, I thought it might be worth touching briefly on the fact that you collaborated on this report with Banksia Foundation, who run their awards, and they specifically have an award for small businesses. I imagine you spoke to a few of those previous winners and finalists through this.
Yeah, that's right. The small business category of the Banksia Awards is something that Australia Post has sponsored for many years. Like, I think we're probably going on 8 years, if not more. And again, we recognise that we have a unique relationship with small businesses because of the composition of our business, but also because so many of our customers are indeed small and micro businesses. And so we've long had a commitment to the Banksia Awards and to the small business category in particular. And the findings of the white paper were drawn through conversations with some of our own customers, small business customers, but also award recipients from the Banksia Awards. So it's worthwhile having a read of that and seeing some of the tips that they had as well in the white paper. But the Banksia Awards this year will be run in late March online, and it's run across 2 days. One of those sessions is really interesting, and they generally do this in person, but I'm kind of excited that they're doing it online this year, which is they interview all of the finalists, and you get a little snapshot of who all the finalists are, what they do, what drives them, and then the next night is the awards night, and you see who's won. And I think often you sort of think, oh, going to the awards bit is the exciting bit, but I think for the small businesses here, actually joining the bit where you hear about the case studies is actually where you'll learn a lot and be quite inspired. And so I believe that's happening from memory the 23rd of March, 22nd, 23rd of March, something like that, but it'll be on the Banksia website. And I encourage you to go to that or to join it online, and to encourage other small businesses that you may be collaborating with to do the same thing. I always find it really inspiring, and there's some amazing people that enter each year, and companies that win each year, or businesses that I should say that win each year.
Awesome. I'll grab that link and put it into the Facebook group after this as well, so people can make sure to register to listen into all of that. I think that it's also potentially something for some small businesses to have in mind for future years, to also be applying to that award as well.
Yeah,
and to follow the businesses who've won in the past to understand what they're doing too. So thank you, Lulu, for sending in a question. What do you think the new challenges are for procurement teams when it comes to dealing with suppliers in mitigating modern slavery risks in the supply chain?
This is a very timely question. Look, I think historically, I've done a master's in supply chain management at Melbourne University, and I was a bit of an anomaly sitting around the desks, because I did it because I came from a human rights background, and I actually had specialised in the area of modern slavery and was lobbying companies about their use of exploited labour in supply chains. My peers around the table, lovely people, but just didn't understand where I was coming from when I studied that 5 years ago, if not 6 years ago. And they were very focused on cost and on delivering on time, and these traditional sort of measures that procurement people and supply chain people are taught to think about. I think one of the biggest challenges is training up procurement people to understand that they have such a powerful role they can play in better understanding social and environmental issues. I think that it's easy for them also to fall back into the way of operating that they've done for a long period of time, and so that educational process has to not be just a one-off training exercise, but an ongoing conversation with those teams. And so I think that the challenges are a little bit behaviour change and educational on one hand. I'd also say, though, that when it comes to modern slavery in particular, the very nature of modern slavery is that it's a crime. It's deliberately hidden out of sight, and so, you know, companies are not going to say, yes, I use exploited labour. And so you can't necessarily rely on, you know, I mean, you know, like when you're filling out a questionnaire, you're not going to say, yes, I use exploited labour. Like you are also often misled, I think, by some people in your supply chain, whether, and that sometimes that's deliberate and sometimes it's not. And so I think it's going for procurement professionals, it's going about their work recognizing that things are not always black and white. I think there's a lot of challenges in that space. I think the other thing is that there's a lot of new technological solutions that exist out there that can help procurement professionals get to the bottom of their supply chains, or have greater transparency of their supply chains without going through the very cost and labour intensive exercise of doing audits of their supply chain. And so there's a lot of new technologies out there that can assist with that as well. And the Freedom software is one of them out of the US.
Perfect. Oh, good. Just in time, Victoria has also just sent in a question. What role does Australia Post play in the sustainability conversation that some e-commerce retailers are now just starting to have around buying better, not just more and more? And how might that diversify the Australia Post business into other verticals?
It's a really good question. I think it's still the minority voice that is concerned about, with this view that buying better is not just you know, better of more and more. Look, it's still the minority voice. I mean, you just need to look at things like, you know, Cyber Monday and Black Friday and things like that to see the impact. You see the incredible volumes that go through our operations at that point in time, and the amount of sales that are just made during that time these days in Australia, in the Australian market. We've picked up those habits from China and from the US of big sales on those days. I think I don't think we've conquered that one, truthfully. I think it's an ongoing conversation, and it will become a more important conversation to be had internally. At this point in time, though, I guess my priorities are really about partnering effectively on sustainability issues, whether it be with our suppliers, whether it can be providing guidance to customers in the way that we're trying to do through the white paper, and also, where possible, reducing our impacts as a company to the best of our ability. So investing in new electric fleet, having more efficient configuration of our logistics footprint, treating our staff and our extended workforce in a respectful and positive manner. So there's certain things that we can control at the moment, and I guess I'm really focused on those. Whereas I think this issue, it's not that I don't think it's important, but I think it hasn't become the minority or the majority issue for us to address at this point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like your point about partnering as well. We were hearing this morning from Pete at Thank You about improving their approach to partnering with their charity partners. And the point of that being less of the donor giving all of the directions and more empowering the partners to do their work well. So I wonder if there is some of that in your partnering with small businesses, be it franchisees, suppliers, and others.
Yeah. Well, I think that I like to think that we need to change the way that we've historically operated with one another, whether it be big business and small business, or NGOs and other NGOs, or NGOs and a corporate. The social issues that we face and the environmental issues that we face today cannot be solved by one sector alone, whether it be the corporates, NGOs, or the government. And so I'm a very strong advocate of cross-pollination between those sectors, and that cross-pollination can only happen meaningfully if it's a genuine partnership in the two-way dialogue, and multi-way dialogue, actually. So I feel that very strongly. From a personal perspective, I've made a point of working in the government sector, in the non-profit sector, and in the corporate sector, so that I can provide those multiple perspectives. And I actually have found myself in situations where peers, not necessarily talking about Australia Post, but where peers have said to me, no, we shouldn't have open a conversation with that NGO that's lobbying us about that issue. Let's just ignore it. And I actually think that we've gone past that as a society. We can't continue to address issues effectively if we take that approach. So yeah, partnership absolutely is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that brings us to about 45-minute mark. So thank you so much, Susan. I've posted the link to the white paper in this chat box, and I'll also post it into the Facebook group for everyone. And I'm remembering the Banksia case study night. That was the other link that I was going to put in there as well. But thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for creating that white paper for small businesses to give them that guidance and to share some of those case studies as well. So that's really useful. And thank you everyone who's on the line. We'll start again at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.